Madison Hayes used to be a beauty queen and cheerleader admired by everyone in her small town. But behind her perfect smile and pretty Instagram pictures, she carried a dark secret one that ended with the shocking death of her baby and a terrible discovery in a trash bag that no one could have expected. The morning was calm and peaceful, the kind where the world feels quiet. Birds sang softly, and a light breeze moved through the trees in the park. A jogger, running along the usual path, noticed something strange near the bushes. At first, it looked like a piece of trash or maybe a shadow, something easy to ignore. But the object looked heavy, shaped oddly, and partly hidden. Curious, the jogger walked closer. When the wind shifted the bag slightly, a sick feeling hit the jogger. Realized this was no normal garbage. The police were called right away. Officers quickly arrived, blocking the area and keeping people back. The once calm air now felt tense, full of fear and shock. Crime scene workers moved carefully, taking pictures and writing notes. The trash bag, once just another object, was now the center of a growing tragedy. It looked ordinary, but the weight inside hinted at something far darker than anyone wanted to believe. When the bag was opened, the horror became clear. Inside was the body of a baby, small, fragile, and lifeless. The little face, so peaceful at first glance, clashed with the awful truth of how the baby had been left. The community was devastated. No one could understand how something so innocent, so helpless, could be tossed away like garbage in their safe, quiet neighborhood. News spread quickly. TV crews showed up, filming the police tape and investigators moving around the scene. Social media filled with posts of shock, anger, and grief. People in the town whispered about the baby's mother, a young woman once loved for her beauty and charm. The contrast between her public image and this awful event was almost too much to believe. Everyone asked the same questions. How could this happen? Who was responsible, and why would anyone treat a baby with such cruelty? Detectives immediately began their work, trying to find the truth. Forensic teams searched for clues, studying the bag, the ground, and everything nearby. Every tiny detail mattered. It soon became clear this was not random. It had taken thought, and that made it all the more chilling. The neighbors, who once felt safe in their routines, now felt uneasy. Their peaceful streets had become the scene of a crime too awful to imagine. The park, once a place of calm, now carried a dark memory. The community braced for answers that would surely break their hearts. Investigators turned to the baby's family. The mother, once a beauty queen and cheerleader, had been a familiar face known for her charm and grace. Old photos showed her smiling proudly under bright lights. Friends remembered her as polite and caring, always looking like she had life under control. But as detectives searched deeper, a very different story began to appear. Neighbors recalled small warning signs. The mother sometimes seemed nervous or rushed, moving quickly through errands with worrying on her face. Some remembered short talks where she hinted at stress or frustration. Her social media posts, once cheerful, had grown sad and strange, showing signs of someone struggling. Police learned she was dealing with many pressures. Money was a big problem, bills piling up, packages left unopened, and arguments about responsibility. Some of her relationships were troubled and secretive, adding more stress. These hidden parts of her life soon became the center of the investigation. Even in her talks with police, details didn't always match. Her timeline had gaps, and she seemed unsure about parts of her story. Detectives wondered if she was lying out of fear, guilt, or shame. The deeper they looked, the more secrets they found, layers of pain and hidden problems that clashed with the image of the smiling, perfect girl everyone thought they knew. As the investigation progressed, a portrait of a family under pressure began to take shape. The baby's life, though brief, had been influenced by a household filled with both love and tension. The mother's charm and public success could not mask the underlying challenges she faced, and investigators started to piece together how these factors might have contributed to the tragic outcome. Each new discovery raised more questions. How had a young woman so admired in her youth reached this point? What events had led to the ultimate moment of tragedy in the park? With each revelation, the story grew darker and more complicated, challenging the assumptions of everyone who had ever believed they truly knew the family. By the end of the chapter, detectives were convinced that uncovering the mother's hidden struggles was key to understanding the baby's death. The pieces were beginning to fit together, revealing a narrative that was as heartbreaking as it was shocking. The public, still grappling with the initial discovery, was only beginning to understand that the tragedy had roots far deeper than a single moment or decision. Behind the polished exterior of a former beauty queen and cheerleader lay a story of desperation, secrecy, and hidden pressures that would eventually become central to the investigation. The autopsy report arrived like a jolt, stripping away any remaining illusions about the nature of the tragedy. Forensic pathologists worked meticulously, documenting every detail of the infant's body with precision and care. At first glance, the baby appeared to be in relatively good health, with no obvious signs of illness. Yet the closer examination revealed a far darker story. There were injuries inconsistent with accidental harm, subtle bruising that suggested repeated pressure or force, and marks that indicated the infant had been handled roughly before being placed in the trash bag. The pathologist's careful notes highlighted these findings in clinical terms, but for investigators, the implications were devastating. In addition to the physical trauma, the autopsy uncovered evidence of neglect. The baby's nutritional status and development pointed to irregular care, suggesting periods of inadequate attention or insufficient feeding. Experts noted that these signs were not the result of a single oversight, but part of a broader pattern. The combination of trauma and neglect painted a chilling picture of vulnerability and danger in a household that outwardly appeared ordinary. It became clear that the infant's death had not been sudden or accidental, but the result of prolonged circumstances that went unnoticed or unaddressed until it was tragically too late. One of the most unsettling revelations from the autopsy was the presence of subtle attempts to obscure the circumstances surrounding the death. The positioning of the body, the way the bag had been sealed, and the absence of certain traces suggested a calculated effort to conceal evidence. Forensic specialists explained that these actions were often indicative of someone trying to avoid discovery, a chilling sign that the death was deliberate rather than a spontaneous accident. The realization that someone had gone to such lengths to hide what had happened added a layer of shock and complexity to the investigation. As the autopsy findings circulated among law enforcement and legal teams, the narrative of the case began to shift. No longer was this merely a tragic loss of life. It was now understood as a crime with elements of intent and premeditation. Detectives reviewed the mother's past behavior, her social media activity, and her interactions with friends and neighbors through a new lens, looking for connections to the injuries and neglect revealed in the report. Every minor discrepancy, every unexplained absence, and every cryptic post gained new significance, suggesting that the truth had been hidden beneath layers of deception. The report also prompted questions about timing and sequence. Experts estimated when the injuries might have occurred, providing critical windows that investigators could use to reconstruct events. These details became central to the unfolding case, offering clues that might connect actions to individuals and establishing a timeline that could determine accountability. The more the pathologists revealed, the more the story grew in complexity, exposing the depth of the tragedy and the challenges investigators faced in piecing together the truth. The autopsy marked a turning point in the investigation. What had begun as a shocking discovery in a quiet park evolved into a complex criminal inquiry. The findings underscored the severity of the situation, confirming that this was not a story of random misfortune but of deliberate harm and prolonged neglect. With this information in hand, detectives were able to focus their efforts on understanding the motivations, circumstances, and decisions that had led to the baby's death, setting the stage for revelations that would continue to shock the community and the nation. As the investigation deepened, detectives began tracing the connections surrounding the mother and her household, uncovering details that no one had expected. Interviews with friends, acquaintances, and extended family painted a picture of a woman under constant pressure, juggling responsibilities and secrets that had gone unnoticed by most of her community. People described her as charming and polite, yet there were hints of tension, moments when she seemed withdrawn or preoccupied. Investigators noticed a pattern. Those closest to her often sensed unease but never imagined the severity of what was happening behind closed doors. Phone records became a critical tool in piecing together the timeline of events. Calls and messages revealed periods of unexplained absence, stretches of time where the mother could not account for her whereabouts. Investigators analyzed these gaps meticulously, cross-referencing them with surveillance footage, witness accounts, and financial transactions. Slowly, a clearer picture began to emerge, a household under strain with moments of chaos and stress that might have contributed to the baby's vulnerability. Every call, every text, every seemingly trivial action gained new significance in the context of the investigation. Financial struggles also played a key role in understanding the environment surrounding the infant. Investigators uncovered unpaid bills, mounting debts, and inconsistencies in daily routines that suggested stress and desperation. The mother had maintained an image of normalcy, continuing to post cheerful updates and maintain a public persona of control, but behind the scenes, pressure was mounting. Experts later explained that financial strain often amplifies stress in households with young children, sometimes leading to neglect or harmful decisions, even when the parents themselves are struggling. As detectives continued their work, they discovered evidence that the mother had attempted to manipulate perceptions and cover her tracks. Statements to authorities sometimes conflicted with facts revealed by surveillance and phone data, creating a trail of inconsistencies. Investigators noted that she had carefully crafted explanations for certain absences and actions, suggesting both panic and calculation. The combination of effort to mislead and signs of prolonged neglect indicated that the tragedy had been preceded by a series of poor decisions, stress-driven reactions, and attempts to protect herself from scrutiny. The more details emerged, the more shocking the revelations became. Investigators pieced together moments of tension, arguments, and hidden struggles that had been invisible to the outside world. The baby's environment, while appearing ordinary from the outside, was filled with underlying conflict and secrecy. These discoveries reframed the narrative. What had initially seemed like an isolated act of tragedy was now understood as part of a pattern of neglect, fear, and concealment. The layers of secrecy surrounding the mother's life and choices became central to the case, helping investigators understand not only what had happened, but why it had happened. By the end of the investigation into these hidden connections, a clear, though unsettling, story had emerged. The mother had been navigating a web of pressures, financial, social, and personal, while trying to maintain an image of control. In doing so, critical signs of danger were overlooked, and the baby became the silent victim of circumstances that might have been preventable. Each revelation added complexity to the case, showing how appearances could mask a far darker reality. The investigation had peeled back the layers of secrecy, exposing a life under strain and the devastating consequences of hidden struggles. The trial captivated the nation, drawing attention from people far beyond the quiet suburban neighborhood where the tragedy had unfolded. Courtroom seats were filled with spectators, journalists, and experts, each eager to understand how such a shocking event could occur. From the beginning, the case was framed by the stark contrast between the mother's public image and the private reality that investigators had uncovered. On the surface, she had been a celebrated beauty queen and high school cheerleader, admired for her charm and accomplishments. Behind closed doors, however, her life had been marked by stress, secrecy, and a series of decisions that ultimately ended in tragedy. The prosecution presented the evidence methodically, detailing the findings of the autopsy, the signs of neglect, and the calculated steps taken to conceal the baby's death. They highlighted the injuries that could not be attributed to accident, the patterns of behavior that suggested premeditation, and the attempts to mislead authorities. Each piece of evidence added weight to the narrative that this was not a spontaneous lapse but a series of harmful actions that culminated in a devastating loss of life. For the jury, the details were difficult to hear but crucial in understanding the full scope of the case. The defense focused on the pressures the mother had faced, portraying her as overwhelmed and fearful, struggling to manage a life that had become unmanageable. They argued that panic and stress had contributed to her actions, and they emphasized her previous reputation as a caring parent and accomplished young woman. While sympathetic elements of her story were presented, the prosecution countered with the cold facts of the autopsy, the timeline, and the inconsistencies in her statements, creating a complex narrative that forced the jury to weigh intent, negligence, and circumstance. As the trial unfolded, new details emerged that surprised both the court and the public. Witnesses described moments of secrecy and concealment, showing how the mother had carefully maintained appearances while critical aspects of her life remained hidden. Experts provided insight into the psychological and environmental factors that can lead to neglect and harm, helping the jury understand the broader context without excusing the consequences of her actions. The juxtaposition of her outward life with the private reality created a tension that kept the courtroom and the public focused on every development. When the verdict was finally reached, it reflected a careful consideration of all the evidence and testimony. The jury had weighed the complex interplay of intent, neglect, and circumstance and determined accountability for the baby's death. The result brought both closure and continued reflection for the community, which had been shaken to its core by the case. People struggled to reconcile the mother's former image with the reality revealed through the investigation, and the neighborhood faced the challenge of processing grief while maintaining trust in one another. In the aftermath, experts and commentators emphasized the lessons of the case. They spoke of the dangers of hidden stress, the importance of vigilance and support for families under pressure, and the tragic consequences that can result when warning signs are overlooked. The story of the baby, once a quiet presence in a suburban home, had become a stark reminder of the fragility of life and the hidden burdens carried by those around us. The trial and its revelations left a lasting impact. A somber reflection on human vulnerability, the consequences of secrecy, and the urgent need for awareness and compassion in protecting the most innocent among us.